Okay, Chapter 10. All my resistance to putting Stargirl on hot seat vanished. Okay, I said to Kevin. Let's do it. Schedule her. He started off. I grabbed his arm. Wait, ask her first. He laughed. Right. Like she's gonna say no. No one had ever said no to the hot seat. Any reluctance to answering personal or embarrassing questions always yielded to the lure of appearing on TV. If anyone could resist that lure, he figured it would be Stargirl. That day after school, Kevin came to me thumbs up and grinning. It's a go. She said yes. First I was surprised. This didn't fit my impression of her. I don't know that this was an early glimpse of something I was soon to see much more of. Behind the dazzling talents and differentness, she was far more normal than I had realized. Then I was elated. We yipped, we high-fived, we saw visions of our most popular show ever. This was mid-January. We set a date of February 13th, the day before Valentine's. We wanted a full month for build-up. With my resistance now gone, I jumped in with both feet. We planned a promo campaign. We got art students to do posters. We jotted down questions for Kevin to ask in case the jury ran out. Fat chance of that happening. We didn't have to post the usual jury notice. Dozens of kids volunteered. And then things changed again. In the courtyard of the school stood a 5-foot sheet of plywood in the shape of a roadrunner. It was the bulletin board, strictly for student use, always taped and tacked with messages and announcements. One day we found the following computer printout taped to the plywood roadrunner. I pledge allegiance to the United Turtles of America and to the fruit bats of Borneo. One planet in the Milky Way, incredible with justice and black bean burritos for all. Handwritten across the bottom were the words, "This is how she says the Pledge of Allegiance." No one had to tell us who she was. Apparently she was overheard in homeroom as we said the pledge each morning. As far as I knew, we were not particularly patriotic bunch. I didn't hear people saying they were offended. Some thought it was funny. Some giggled and nodded knowingly as if to say, there she goes again. Oh, on the following mornings, more than one kid was heard reciting the new pledge. Within days, a new story wildfired through the student body. A senior girl, Anna Grinsdale, lost her grandfather after a long illness. The funeral took place on Saturday morning. For a while, everything seemed routine. The crowd of people at the church, the line of cars with their headlights on, the small group clustered around the grave for the final farewell. After a brief graveside service, the funeral director handed everyone a long stem flower. Upon leaving, each mourner laid his or her flower over the casket. This was when Anna Grinsdale first noticed Stargirl. Through her own tears, Anna could see that Stargirl was crying also. She wondered if Stargirl had been at the church as well. Even more, she wondered why Stargirl was there at all. Could she have been friends with her grandfather without Anna's knowing it? Anna's mother asked her who the unfamiliar girl was. Afterward, the mourners were invited to Anna's house for lunch. About 30 came. There was a buffet of cold cuts and salads and cookies. Stargirl was there, chatting with members of the family, but not eating or drinking anything. Suddenly Anna heard her mother's voice. It was louder than the others, but it was different. "What are you doing here?" Sudden stillness, everyone staring. They were in front of the picture window. Anna had never seen her mother so angry. Mrs. Grinsdale had been very close to her father. They had built an addition to their house so he could live with them. She glared down at Stargirl. "Answer me!" Stargirl gave no reply. "You didn't even know him, did you?" Still, Stargirl said nothing. "Did you?" And then Anna's mother was flinging open the front door and pointing as if to banish her to the desert. "Leave my house." Stargirl left. Danny Pike was 9 years old. He loved to ride his bicycle, the bicycle he had gotten for his birthday. One day after school, he lost control and plowed into a mailbox. He broke his leg, but it wasn't the worst of it. A blood clot developed. He was airlifted to a children's hospital in Phoenix, where he was operated on. For a while, it was touch and go, but within a week, he was on his way back home. All of this reported in the Micah Times, as the celebration when as was the celebration when Danny arrived at his home in Pinion Lane. The 5-column photo in the Times showed Danny on his father's shoulder, surrounded by a mob of neighbors. In the foreground was a new bike and a big sign that read, "Welcome home, Danny." It wasn't until days later when the front page photo appeared in the Plywood Roadrunner. We gathered around to see something we hadn't noticed before. An arrow from a thick red felt tip marker pointed at one of the tiny faces crowded into the frame. It was the face of a girl, beaming at Danny Pike, as if Danny Pike were her little brother, back from the dead. It was Stargirl. And then there was the bike. The various members of the Pike family, parents, grandparents, etc., each thought someone else had bought Danny the new bicycle. Several days went by before they discovered, to their great surprise, that none of them had. So where did the bike come from? High schoolers who heard the story and saw the picture had a pretty good idea. Apparently the Pikes did not. The bike became the focus of the family squabble. Mr. Pike was mad because nobody he asked would admit to buying the bike, and probably because he hadn't done it himself. Mrs. Pike was mad because no one, not for at least 1 year, would she allow Danny back on wheels. One night, the new, still unridden bike wound up at the Pikes' front curb with the trash cans. By the time the trash collector came the next day, it was gone. Danny got a BB gun instead. The Pledge of Allegiance, the Grinsdale funeral, the Danny Pike affair, these things were noted, but they were not they had no immediate impact on Stargirl's popularity at school. Not so with cheerleading and the boys' basketball season. Chapter 11. My box here. Oops. There. Sorry. Chapter 11. During the first quarter of each home game, Stargirl went out over to the visitor section and gave them a cheer. She began with an exaggerated bouncing motion. Dribble, dribble. Sis, boom, bibble. We don't bite. We don't nibble. We just say, sweeping wave, howdy, friends. We're the electrons. Who are you? Waits for a reply. A couple of visiting cheerleaders, maybe a fan or two, would call back Wildcats or Cougars or whatever, but most of them just gaped at her as if to say, "Who is this?" Some of the fellow cheerleaders were amused. Some were mortified. At that point, the only crime Stargirl could have been accused of would be corniness. But it didn't stop there. She cheered whenever the ball went in the basket, regardless of which team shot it. It was the strangest sight. The other team scores, the MAHS crowd sits grumly in their hands, while Stargirl alone pops up cheering. At first, the other cheerleaders tried to suppress her. It was like trying to calm down a puppy. When they gave her the pleated skirt, they made a cheerleader they never imagined. She did not limit herself to basketball games. She cheered anyone, anything, anytime. She cheered the big things, honors, election winners. She gave most of her attention to little things. You never knew when it was it would happen. Maybe you were a little 9th grader, nobody named Eddie. As you were walking down the hall you see a candy wrapper on the floor. You pick it up and throw it in the nearest trash can, and suddenly there she is in front of you, pumping her arms, her honey hair and freckles flying, swallowing you whole with those enormous eyes, belting out a cheer she making up on the spot. Something about Eddie and the trash can teaming up to wipe out litter. A mob is gathering, clapping hands in rhythm, more eyes on you than all the previous days of your life combined. You feel foolish, exposed, stupid. You want to follow the candy wrapper into the trash can. It's the most painful thing that's ever happened to you. Your brain keeps squirting out the single thought, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. And so, when she finally finishes and her freckles settle back onto the bridge of her nose, why don't you just die? Because they're clapping for you, that's why. And whoever heard of dying while they're clapping for you and they're smiling at you? People who never saw you before are smiling at you and slapping your back and pumping your hand, and suddenly it seems like the whole world is calling your name. And you're feeling so good, you pretty much just float on home from school. And when you go to bed that night, the last thing you see before you yonk out are those eyes, and the last thing on your face is a smile. Or maybe you showed up at school with really unusual earrings, or you aced a test, or you broke your arm, or you got your braces off, or maybe you weren't even a person. Maybe you were a charcoal drawing on the wall done by an art whiz, or a really neat-looking bug out by the bike rack. We wagged our heads and agreed what a goofy girl this was, but maybe officially crazy. But we walked away smiling and maybe not saying, but all thinking the same thing. It felt good to get credit. And if this had been any other year, things might have just gone on and on like this. But this was the year something unbelievable was happening on the basketball court. This was the year the team was winning. Only winning. And that changed everything. Early in the season, no one noticed, except for the girls' tennis. We had never had a good teams in anything. We expected to lose. We were comfortable with losing. In fact, most of us were oblivious to it, since we didn't even attend the games. The year before, the basketball Electrons had won only 5 of the 26 games. This year, they won their 5th game before Christmas. By early January, they had won their 10th. People began to notice that there was still a 0 in the loss column. Undefeated, blared the sign in the plywood Roadrunner. Someone had said we were winning by accident. Some said that the other teams were simply more rotten than we were. Some thought the sign was a joke. One thing that was certain, attendance went up. By the start of February, the winning streak had reached 16, and there wasn't an empty seat in the gym. But something even more interesting was happening. Suddenly, we were no longer comfortable with losing. In fact, we forgot how to lose. The transformation was stunning in its speed. There was no apprenticeship period, no learning curve. No one had to teach us how to be winners. No, one day we were bored, indifferent, satisfied losers. The next we were rabid fanatics, stomping in the grandstand, painting our faces green and white, doing the wave as if we had been perfecting it for years. We fell in love with our team. When we spoke of it, we used the words we instead of they. The leading scorer, Brent Ardsley, seemed to have a golden glow about him as he moved through the school. And the more we loved our team, the more we hated the opposition. We used to envy them. We even applauded them in spite of our own helpless team. Now we detested the opposition and everything about them. We hated their uniforms. We hated their coach and their fans. We hated them because they were trying to spoil our perfect season. We resented every point scored against us, and how dare they celebrate. We began to boo as our first experience as booers, but you thought we were veterans. We booed the other team, we booed the other coach, we booed the other fans, the referees, whatever threatened our perfect season, we booed it. We even booed the scoreboard. We hated games that went down to the wire. We hated suspense. We loved games that were decided in the first 5 minutes. We wanted more than victories. We wanted massacres. The only score we would have to be totally happy with would have been 100-0. And right there in the middle of it, in the midst of the perfect season mania, was Stargirl, popping up whenever the ball went through the net, no matter which team scored, cheering everything and everybody. It was sometime in January, when the calls started flying from the stands. Sit down! Then came the boos. She didn't seem to notice. She did not seem to notice. Okay, I'm almost out of my time for my 15-minute max on this recording, so finish chapter 11 on your own.